kind of esoteric spiritual practices may be characteristic of modernity, sort of a response to, on the one hand, the democratic modern rejection of institutional hierarchies like the Orthodox Church and the monarchy, um, but also in a way expressing consumerist individuality. Like, I am cobbling together my own spiritual doctrine. Um, uh, you know, little yoga, little astrology, little, I don't know, iconography, tattoos, um, and uh, there's religious aspect, as I was just suggesting, looking at, or mythological aspect to a lot of popular culture, like the Kendrick Lamar we were just listening to. Um, and there's a political dimension to that. That it has to do with community formation and historical reading history, um, reading the direction of history, the purpose of history, what's waste and what's valuable. Um, that's in the Kendrick Lamar we listened to. Is rereading the N word means a revolutionary sort of reorientation towards what history means. The history of slavery, African Americans in the U.S. Um, uh, so I that's an important, I think, dimension of romanticism, and the when we talk about esoteric, occult, pagan, uh, these terms all are a little bit uh, disparaging, terms of derision, I think, in the same way the term romantic has negative implications of delusional, impractical. Likewise, occult or esoteric is negatively defined just as unorthodox. Any kind of spiritual experience that isn't legitimized by an orthodox institution. Um, uh, so that's a dimension of that's in play in romantic literature. The spiritual religious dimension that we're going to be exploring more, and I I want to focus now to try to illuminate what the stakes of this. I mean, in the Kendrick Lamar piece, he's talking about time, like the purposeful, meaningful, substantial experience of time versus wasted time that's made into shit, like imprisonment. Um, and he's suggesting that's what's at stake in our our own lives, in negotiating meaningful versus meaningless experience of time. And that's we've been exploring in lots of different ways in these romantic poets. Uh, Sort of the empty clock time versus a kind of spiritually animated, imaginatively, creatively active experience of time that's connected with eternity. Um, so that's related. I think I want to explore that now in terms of the kind of motif of counting. Um, and it's there's sort of a occult dimension of numerology. It's even part of Orthodox religion too, the Trinity, um, why, what's, special about the number three? Why is that so commonly a common feature of, spiritual figures, icons, and narratives, the Trinity? Um, the number three is mentioned here in Blake's Crystal Cabinet, the threefold smile. What we remember, we looked at the smile. It says there's a smile of love and a smile of deceit and a smile of smiles in which these two smiles meet. It's a trinity. Why is that? What is the threefold? What's the importance of that? Well, there's the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, past, present, and future. It's kind of a orientation in time. We're always in this present and looking forward and looking back. There's sort of a triangular structure to our consciousness in time. Another thought that occurs to me, it also has to do with time, is people say things have to happen twice in order to register. Like, if something just happens once, like it's a total one-off, it's hard to define what it even was. If something just happens one time, what was that? I don't know. It kind of has to happen twice. That repetition lets you identify it as a thing, right? Kind of a horrifying example of this springs to mind, or I've heard a philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, discuss, is the September 11th terrorist attack. It happens once, it's like, what the fuck is going on? But then it happens twice, and it's like, okay, it's a terrorist attack. That it was with the second plane we know becomes a thing. And so I think that's true of life. Like, it's when we see things twice, then it's like we can recognize it. But that repetition implies a third thing. There's a saying in Italian, "Non c'è due senza tre." Like, no, you can't have two without three. And I mean, I don't know if that has to do with the prominence of Catholicism in Italian culture, but I think there's something true in a secular sense about that too. Just so you recognize things, a repetition. But then you get once you recognize a repetition, then you get a third thing, which is the concept of the thing that's been repeated in time. So you have an idea now. To say it's a thing out in the world is to have a representation of that thing as a concept in your mind. So there's, the repetition, and then the concept. And I think that's what Blake there's a smile of love, smile of deceit, and then there's the smile of smiles, where these two smiles meet. There's the concept that applies to the various empirical manifestations in the world of smiles that are actual phenomena. Like, I can apply the concept. Um, and so I think that's true of the Trinity. It's like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost that um, uh, um, unites them. Um, so isn't that interesting? Just to think about this kind of aesthetic structure of our consciousness. Um, it's musical rhythm of consciousness. We're always sort of rotating through this triangle. Um, so that's a way that maybe helpful way of thinking about kind of iconic aesthetic form. It's like a spiritual icon or something that uh, is that organizes experience in an entirely secular sense of just our phenomenological experience. Our consciousness is kind of has this formal arrangement to it. Okay, so I'm gonna look now at various examples of kind of geometrical form and numbers in Wordsworth and Coleridge. So another word for song or dance is number, right? That's something you should always be attentive to when you hear poems referring to numbers. There's a self-reference um, to poetry. And in particular, this question that is also, the question that Kendrick Lamar is focusing on is the distinction between empty time, empty counting. Numbers are the way of quantifying qualitative experience, turning it into empty, abstract quantities. Um, at the same time, numbers, music, is a way of uh, creating community, dissolving oneself into larger social, embodied, so a larger social body. We, speak of a collective social body. Music creates a collective body. Organizes the aesthetic experience of individuals into a common rhythm, and organizes social imagination. Likewise, Kendrick Lamar is talking about a collective mythology, creating a collective identity that is mobilizing a collective identity that in the music is exercised, but it's also goes beyond just the performance of the music into the outside social world, and that it has political implications. The numbers in Blake's poem, for instance, The Crystal Cabinet, um, refer quite explicitly to poetry, unmistakably to poetry. Um, the cabinet, um, another word for uh, the word for the word stanza is Italian for room. So what he's describing here is like going into a room, entering into a poem, um, uh, that recreates the world. Another England there I saw, another London with its towers, another Thames and other hills, another pleasant Surrey bower. So it's the world of poetry, the time of poetry replaces the um, uh, real world outside. Another maiden like herself. So this is getting kind of trippy, where the experience of the poem also is getting replicated within the poem. translucent, lovely, shining clear, threefold each in other closed. Oh, what a pleasant trembling fear. So this sense of self-consciousness, like, well, my world is getting recreated through poetry, and this recreation itself is getting reorganized. Um, but again, I think that's this. There's one. There's the repetition. Then there's the concept of the things repeated. Um, um, and so he draws us into this complex poetic dance of imagination and of music, of the music of the poem itself, the meter. And then the cabinet is lost in the typical scenario of possessivism, like consumerism. Like, I instead of staying with the dance and allowing this pattern of this threefold pattern to play out, it's like I want to hold on to it. I want to own it as one. I strove to seize the inmost form with utter fierce in hands of flame. That needing to fix and hold and control as one thing that I know is mine, that I own, destroys the dance, destroys the poem, destroys the home, the cabinet. And this, it's a crystal cabinet. That's, another kind of, I don't know, pagan icon crystals. It's weird, like natural, it's like viruses. Crystals are weirdly or kind of quasi-organic. They grow and yet they're not alive. In some sense, they're like viruses that way, like frost. So this We Are Seven juxtaposes two kinds of counting: a spiritually animated counting creates community, creates a family through a sense of spirit, and on the other hand, a dead counting, indeed a deadening counting, not just an abstract indifferent counting, but like Kendrick Lamar says, a counting that makes time like it into shit. So it's a male adult. It's a juxtaposition in this a conversation between male and female, and adult and child simultaneously. The adult male is the narrator, and represents this objective, empirical, mechanistic ideology that romantics are, often concerned to critique. And what strikes me, and the narrator fails to understand the way the girl counts, that he interrogates her, and he keeps harping on her insistence that her deceased siblings remain a part of her family, as if she's doing failing to, as if she's mistaken the arithmetic, that she's getting a math problem wrong. And so what strikes me is this insistence on death. What the child exposes in the adult is weirdly morbid, it normally implicit, but she forces him to make it explicit. This investment in death. I want, but they are dead. Those two are dead. This she's his underlying kind of obsession with death is exposed, and this is concomitantly an investment in waste, throwing words away, the meaninglessness of poetry, of language. Disregarding the dead is tantamount to disregarding language, treating both as dispensable. And I think there's a kind of fear that we're getting exposed to here. A simple child that lightly draws its breath and feels its life in every limb. What should it know of death? That's a good question. Why is the narrator asking it? It's as if he wants reassurance that this simple child, refers to as it, knows nothing of death. He's wants reassurance that his words are getting thrown away, and that the dead don't matter. There's a very stark juxtaposition of and spiritually animated, purposeful counting that's aligned with poetry, with the meaningfulness of language, and on the other hand, a kind of counting that turns both life and language to shit, to waste. Just want to point out the beginning, first few lines of these Wordsworth's famous Tintern Abbey poem. The prominence of the date here is something to think about in relation to numbers, as like in the Composed on Westminster Bridge poem. What's the significance of the date? It seems that it's so arbitrary and random, yet numbers matter. A kind of counting of the seasons, counting of the years, is significant here. And just think a similar kind of juxtaposition between meaningful, spiritually animated numbers and arbitrary numbers, arbitrary dates, is at play here. 5 years have passed. So it sounds like just counting. I do calendar, counting off the pages of the calendar. But then he gets increasingly specific and concrete. 5 summers. What's the difference between just counting 5 years and counting 5 summers? What's the difference from those two with counting the length of 5 long winters? So increasingly, I think, embodied and inspirited and poetic counting numbers that we get in each of these 3 instances of 5. And the rest of this initial section of Tintern Abbey explores that threefold of the repetition, the past, the memory, and then the repetition of it in the present, and how this creates a kind of third thing, which is the concept, the mental image. So again, I hear these waters. So notice all the instances throughout this beginning section of what are called indexical pronouns, pronouns that point. These is like he's trying to, isolate the present moment, his present experience, and say, I've got this memory, and then I'm here. And he's trying to arrange the concept of their continuity. Um, uh, and Notice also how each time he points, it's like these, it dissolves into a kind of atmosphere. So I did this threefold, he's really acting out the relationship between the kind of static memory, the particular here and now, and then a dynamic kind of atmosphere, the murmur, um, the inland murmur, thoughts of more deep seclusion, the way in which past and present are mentally arranged, evoked as a atmosphere. Um, so 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with the soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day has come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave where by his fire the hermit sits alone. I hope you can get a sense for that rhythm that I was talking about between the memory, the indexical pointing to the here and now, and then the sort of imaginary arrangement of the atmosphere, the kind of the medium of the ongoing flow of experience. It's as, the scene in front of him kind of dissolves into this the imaginary medium that he's constructing, the atmosphere, the arrangement. These hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines run wild. So it's as if the here and now is kind of dissolving into this more formal crystal geometry of her musical rhythm of the interplay of the present and memory. And this initial section ends with a kind of almost mythological imagining. He's almost turning it into a quasi-narrative of the hermit's cave. He's turning the scene from just a sort of the formal play of his memory into a kind of a little bit of a enchanted fable. of the hermit in the woods. Um, the where by his fire the hermit sits alone. It's become a story, a incipient story. The hermit. Um, it's already sort of narrating the scene. Um, so that's I guess a parallel that I want to suggest with We Are Seven, the spiritually animated um, counting of time um, versus the kind of empty calendar clock time with which the poem begins. Tintern Abbey looks at how the hedgerows that you see, these hedgerows, the concrete element of the um, present environment dissolve into sportive lines, hardly hedgerows, lions run wild. Um, is it suggesting what I want to suggest about fractal form and Blake, the underlying sort of geometry of reality. If you look at reality close enough or far enough away, dissolves into weather patterns or microscopic other kinds of patterns. Um, uh, the, um, these are ways of correlating the sort of crystal pattern, the threefold, the crystal cabinet, the structure of experience, correlating that with the structure of nature at every level. And that's what Coleridge does here, looking at crystal, frost formation. The secret ministry of frost. It's the silent formation of frost crystals, the poet's imagining out on the lawn at night. This subliminal activity of nature. It's like it's not quite alive, but it's a kind of animation of the cosmic sort of, the physical world. And, again, I think, as I was saying about Blake's sort of anticipation of, more advanced science than his own era of sort of, the quantum arrangement of reality. I think there's a similar kind of anticipation of a more advanced conception of the reality is a consequence of our perception of it. It's not as well as the object of perception. It's also an expression of our perception. Perceiving reality is to intervene in reality. And so the images of frost crystal formation, the secret ministry. It's image of that, the activity of the activeness, dynamic quality of perception. And it's also, an image of, Blake's dark secret love, of what corrupts the godlike view of truth, of objective truth. And it's and like it's like the virus, the way in which our what we think of as life is wholesome in contrast to what is dead. That's what the speaker in We Are Seven is trying to hold life and death starkly apart. And these romantic poems, especially like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, are troubling that clear distinction. And that's part of what's going on here too. So notice again these kind of rhythms of experience that he's juxtaposing the utter stillness, unthinkable stillness, unhelped by any wind. So he's thinking just about utterly still, frosty night and this weird activity of crystal formation. It's an image of our own minds. And later in this section, he'll use the kind of opposite, the contrary figure of heat, the expansion of heat, and the way in which it causes a piece of ash to flutter on the grate of his stove. So utterly still, but there's this subliminal movement of air expanding, causing this ash to flutter, and frost crystals forming. And these are images of the mind, of thinking. Vexed, that thought vexing, vexation of thought. So the frost performs its secret ministry, unhelped by any wind. The owlet's cry came loud, and hark again, loud as before. So he acts out like at the beginning of Tintern Abbey. It's like the owlet's cry came loud, like that's a narrative past, and hark again. It's a repetition. It puts us into a flow of time and memory, and the concepts in which in words, the string of words in which by which that flow is represented. So Coleridge is talking about frost and ash, and I want you to think about, that issue of waste. I think there's a continuity here between the trash of the speaker in We Are Seven says it's like throwing words away. He's trying to insist on the dead. You're only five. Those two are forgotten. They're wasted. They're don't count anymore. There's what's at stake here is a kind of rehabilitation of what's going uncounted. And like in Blake's The Invisible Worm, the dark secret love, they're trying to rehabilitate, find love, animation, spirit in what has gone uncounted. Again, like Kendrick Lamar, what was counted as shit. It's this what he calls here in Frost at Midnight, drawing at that key romantic term, the stranger, the idling spirit, this encounter with the stranger, this the weird frost outside, the weird movement of the ash. He recalls this imagination, this image from childhood of a stranger, and that's an important. Goes back to that theme of the earth, rehabilitating what's wasted by discovering new media for expressing meaning. That's the what the girl is able to express in We Are Seven a new conception of personhood precisely because she is not counted by the man. She's a little, what should she know of death? But precisely because she represents a new voice, a voice that was not counted, she offers a new perspective from which to count people in a different way. So this poetry is about finding new media, counting by means that didn't count before. So I'm trying to emphasize again, as always, the romantic concern with form, the medium of communication. And, how, I mean, this is a legacy of Christianity too. The meek shall inherit the earth, just rehabilitating what's wasted, what seems like the least meaningful, the least powerful, the weakest, the most marginal becomes the center, the most meaningful. This revolution of priorities and values, transvaluation of values, is opens up the possibility of a new media of communication. I'm going to show you a quick video about sort of a cult religious practice, or sort of esoteric Christian ritual, to get you thinking about media and how that this creative use of media is it plays a crucial role in this creative individual exploration of combining the eternal, the absolute, the infinite, and the here and now.
Once a month, on the 13th, they come to the Mojave Desert and point their cameras at the sun.
The first time we took a photograph of the sun, right below at 6 o'clock was an actual picture of the Blessed Mother.
When I took the first picture, it was amazing because I got something that they call the door to heaven. And then I got another picture where it shows when the Virgin is actually giving the message to the people. And you can see the Virgin right next to the sun.
We've gotten many different pictures. Mary, Jesus, the Pope, staircases.
All the nice churches that we built for God everywhere. And he and his messengers choose to reveal themselves out here, in exactly the place where you'd want a roof over your head. It's 110 degrees. Of course, if God is everywhere, you already believe in God. No question about that. Why do you need a picture?
Well, for me, that picture is just saying it is real. It happened. I didn't dream this. It's true. I was there, and I have proof.
So it's almost like a souvenir that you were actually a witness to this.
More than a souvenir. It is a sign. It would be just like if someone who's in love with someone gives them a rose. It's a sign of their love.
Mire, aquí está una carita, si se fija. Ahí está una carita.
So it's almost like a reminder.
Yeah.
And so it's important to sort of have like a souvenir to carry around.
Yeah.
Is there the possibility that the camera just happens to sort of respond to light in this particular way?
No, because people could also feel her. You could sense her.
Yeah.
It's not just because of the camera.
Yeah.
You could feel her.
Like you can like sense
That she's
things.
there.
Yeah, and it's real and stuff.
The faithful are always looking for ways to get to God. They come together all over the world, in churches and prayer groups, and in the desert too. And they use whatever means are at their disposal. They have to use such earthly means, you know? The chemicals on a 4x5 rectangle of Polaroid film. The point is to see them, feel something as a result.
So I think it's really apt what he said there at the end about we need such humble means, such earthly means. There's always going to be this disconnect, this contrary between the means by which we evoke our larger sense of purpose and where we're going in life. We're always in accidental kind of circumstances right here, but we want to evoke some sense of purpose of where we're going. And so that always involves a leap of faith. And I also really appreciated what the elderly woman said about comparing these images to a flower that a lover offers to the beloved, that likewise, what makes a flower a romantic gesture is the leap of faith. It's not entirely clear what it means, It's symbolic. And so, likewise, that's how poetry works, it's not entirely clear what it means. It's symbolic. So it's deprived, it's lacking in certain meaning, so it's waste. It doesn't have that assurance. It's a humble, meaningless, and on some level. But that's the romance of it. That's what allows or offers the opportunity to express and communicate faith in the largest kind of meaning, something much more meaningful than what you could have assurance in. And more than that, it is an opportunity to pay attention to form, the kind of play of light, the idle aesthetic pleasure of just the play of light on the camera lens, on the camera film, is like the play of language, and the intricate formations, like fractals that have a lot to teach about reality, but we kind of need to detach from conventional norms of evaluation and purpose and identity in order to recognize this level of to appreciate this level of complexity. If this ritual wouldn't have its appeal if Jesus were in fact to appear in the sky and say, "Hey, it's me." It works because it appeals to faith. It's because it's questionable. That's why it works. And that experience of faith is, allows us to recognize this a level of complexity that it defies kind of certain knowledge. So that interactive, the complexity of environmental interaction, that's awareness of the creativity of our own vision, the active creative role that we take in our perception of the objective world. So, and that's even as these poets are sort of comparing their picture of reality to waste, to ash, and the disreputable opinion of a little girl that should have no knowledge of what she's talking about. Poetry can be incredibly intricate in its uselessness. So just consider, this passage with which Frost at Midnight concludes is it amazingly, dazzlingly psychedelic, like the formation of frost that he wants to is kind of mimicking. So he's talking about the seasons, and like Wordsworth, he's evoking an experience of time, an embodied experience of time, making time concrete, like a dance. So all the seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the general earth with greenness, or the red breast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow on the bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the night thatch smokes in the sun thaw. So great. So the tree is smoking, sublimating, like the snow is turning to steam in the sunlight. So again, these really intricate descriptions of time, embodied physical movement, like the Ministry of Frost. But get this final image, or whether the eavesdrops fall, so that the thawing snow dripping, heard only in the trances of the blast. So that's the drip that you hear only when again, like the owls cry, you just hear it when the wind stops. So again, this kind of environmental, interactive perception. Or if the secret ministry of frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon. So first he evokes the drop coming down, then he evokes the ministry of frost as if hanging it up, suspending that moment of, the icicle formation, the drop is suspended as it's frozen. And in that moment, we see the moon reflecting through it. And it reflecting the light back. Amazing evocation, interplay of time and space, planets, and minuscule particular event, infinity in a grain of sand.